Yeah, welcome to the talk of Tim Huijzers. Did I pronounce it correctly?
It's close. Huijzers.
Huijzers. Okay. We actually met at the FrostCon a couple of weeks ago, and I just asked, "Hey, you're doing something with event sourcing," and I know our engineers are doing something with event sourcing, or at least are interested, and it's really great to have him here. Please give him a warm welcome and enjoy the talk.
So, Mike, okay? I'm going to tell a little bit about my first year with event sourcing. It's been a little bit more than a year right now, but I thought, what can I do with it? In the beginning, it was kind of hard to get into it. There was a lot of theory about what you should do, but no, I couldn't find any examples. That changed when I did a tutorial at the Dutch PHP conference, and since, well, before that even, I've been fiddling with it and trying to get more experience with it, and even got something in production with it. But right now, let's talk a little bit about myself, because that's always mandatory. My name is Tim Huijzers. You can know me on the internet as Dragem or as Webbeard. It's like the Dutch webbaard, because I work with the web and I have a beard. I'm a developer at drukwerkdeal.nl. Maybe you know Wir machen Druk. That's one of our sister companies. We do web to print. And at Drukwerkdeal, I'm mostly responsible for making sure that our customers can pay. So invoicing, payment methods, stuff like that. I'm also founder of the Devter PHP user group. Not the biggest user group, but we're growing steadily. So if you're nearby, come visit us. So this is Devter for the people that wanted to know. I've been through Nuremberg and really like it, so I thought, well, my city is beautiful. So let's talk about the first time I tried event sourcing. So there was a talk from Greg Young. And he really sparked my interest about event sourcing, but it was all theory. So looked a little bit online, had limited knowledge, no experience. I thought, well, I want to do it clean, so I don't want third-party software in my domain. I want to make it clean, and well, it was doomed from the start. It was every problem that I encountered, I didn't know what possible solutions there were. So nice try, doomed from the start. So after that, we tried it again. We did a hackathon, had limited knowledge, limited experience, but we went all the way. So we tried a framework we didn't use before, a dependency injection manager that we didn't use before, called Disco. Really nice if you want to fiddle with it. And a new event sourcing framework. Still not enough knowledge, still doomed from the start. So the third try, actually had some knowledge, actually had some experience. We took a framework that we knew, a database that we knew, an event sourcing framework that we knew. Still, with all those things in place, it's still doomed. It's running right now, but it's going to be replaced, but not because the event sourcing part. I'm still very proud of this one. So I guess you could say I know what I'm doing. I failed enough now. But let's talk a little bit about beer. I'm into craft beer. This is one of my favorites, the Kentucky brand stout. Really powerful, high in alcohol. Yeah, you can drink 3 of those and you're drunk. The problem is that my favorite beer is a beer that I haven't had before. So you could say I have a collection of different beers. And there are so many that I don't know what I have, what I already drunk or gave away, or it's easy to forget if you have 500 different kinds of beer. So let's build a beer warehouse. Let's build an application where we can see what we actually have, what actually happens there. So why would you do this with event sourcing? And to answer that, we're gonna first look at CRUD. I think everyone should have some familiarity with CRUD. So with CRUD, you would basically have something in your system, your database, or whatever, where you want to start, that you call a beer. It would have the name of the brewer, the name of the beer, date when you buy it or bought it, a location where it's at to find it, and a style. So every new entry, every new beer you put in the system, you just put in where it is and what it is, and you can look it up later. So my girlfriend thinks that the fridge is for food and not for beer. So later I'm changing the location to shelf. But right now the system only knows that location. You changed some history. Your system doesn't know anymore that it's been in the fridge. That might be important later. Maybe you want to have some reporting or on how many beers your girlfriend makes you take out of the fridge. And what about if you drink it? Then you would delete it from your system, so you don't have that information anymore. You can work around a little bit, maybe set the location on all gone to make sure that you know that it's not there anymore, but still know that it was there at one point in time. Still, maybe a consumption date. Maybe you want to say, if the consumption date is filled in, then you know that it's not there anymore. But every time you change stuff like this, it only applies to the new beers. So anything before your change in your code, you don't have that history anymore. So basically that's not good enough. So let's look at events, what we have in our system if we use events. Basically, I'm telling the system what happens. I'm saying beer added to storage, making it implicit, but the rest of the information is, well, it's the same as before. So that doesn't change that much. But we can do a little bit better. We can make it smaller. We can just say, well, I bought a beer bought. I removed the location because maybe you want to add it to your system before you store it in your fridge or your shelf or whatever. Maybe you want to, on the drive home, want to put it in your system. And then later you can call the beer moved and say, well, I now put it in my fridge. And you can even reuse that when you move it from your fridge to your shelf. You can use the same event. What about consumed? Very easy. You're just saying what happened, and you only need the identifier of that beer. So it's a long GIF. I think she's impressed. So let's recap what you got with event sourcing. If you used CRUD, you know what you have at that moment. You know when it consumed, you know where it is. But with event sourcing, you get so much extra information. You know what you have, you know when it was consumed, where it is, where it was before, when it was moved, where it was at any point in time, how many times you moved it, when it was added to the system, and what else was moved on that same day. The list goes on, but these are just a few examples of what you could get from your events. Eric Evans, the creator or the writer of one of the most important programming books there is, Domain-Driven Design, says every software program relates to some activity or interest of its user. I think with event sourcing, you're basically telling what happens in in the real world. So if you want to have a program that's close to the activities or interests of your user, event sourcing might be an option for you. Basically, you're telling a story. So when do you want to use event sourcing? When you want an audit log, when you want scalability, when you want to separate the read and the write of your application. It's not necessarily to do event sourcing if you want to do it, but it comes with the terrain. What about if you want to replay events on your dev machine to get an accurate situation of the state at one moment in time? How great would it be to get a message, an error message in your logs, and you display, or you replay all the events until that point, and you know exactly what the state was at your production machine. If you want to do reporting, but you're not quite sure what kind of reporting, you can just do the reporting later. And if you're completely done with mapping objects to tables, then maybe give event sourcing a try. So when do you not want to use event sourcing? When you only need a simple CRUD system. For instance, to track all your beer in your fridge. When you're processing a lot of personal data, by default, personal data is mutable, so event sourcing is not the greatest place for personal data. If you want to query a lot of things on the database, you could do it with event sourcing, but if that's like your main priority for your application, there are other options. And when you're not used to event sourcing and you're starting on your big project for production, maybe not start with event sourcing. Maybe start with something for a hackathon or side projects first. So let's see how event sourcing would look in code. For the examples, I'm using prooph. There's a small disclaimer that recently prooph announced that they think your domain needs to be clean, and they changed up their approach a little bit, but until the end of 2019 this would still be valid. But yeah, small disclaimer. If you go to getprooph.org and you see this, then you're in the right place. Basically, what I'm going to show you is this. We have commands. So I'm saying something to my system, buy beer or consume beer. I have a command handler, buy beer, consume beer, each have their own handler. Those go to an aggregate called beer. Basically, your model with all your business logic. And the result of that would be events like beer bought, beer moved, and beer consumed. So let's look at the commands. This is the buy beer command. You're seeing the extends command and the implements payload constructible. Those are prooph stuff. So if you use prooph right now, you can use those and you don't have to worry about overhead functions that will be the same in every instance. There's a payload trait just for prooph to do all the stuff for you. So basically what you have to do is say, I have a static function from warehouse. So you're saying, I buy a beer for my warehouse. The information is passed on. Location, maybe you don't know the location yet. And the result is an instance of itself. Basically with the payload in it, so it's an array with the information. If you want to retrieve that information, just normal get functions are enough here. I'm using value objects here, but if you just want to return a string, that's all fine. It's all up to you. And the last thing is the set payload. It's something that prooph needs to build up if you want automatic commands that you don't build yourself. So if we look at the consume beer, basically it's the same, but the things that are important for you, like what happens in your system, that is different. So instead of all the information, I only need the beer ID. And again, I have a get function to get the beer ID and the set payloads. So those I built, those I put in my system. I let prooph handle them, and prooph will have some kind of configuration to get them to the command handler. Configuration depends a little bit on what framework you use, what kind of configuration you want, but it's pretty easy. It would just be the namespace class name to namespace class name, something like that. So the command will be handled in the buy beer handler. In the construct, we need some kind of collection, so we know where the system stores the beer. In this case, it's the beer collection. And we have an invoke method. So basically, this class is just a simple method where we, in this case, make a beer object with a static function. Write information is passed. Then the move to function is called with the location. Because in the previous example, you saw that the location could be null, so an if check would be nice here. And then we save it to the collection. And if we look at the consume beer handler, again, you need the beer collection, and the invoke method only accepts the consume beer command. And we get the beer from the collection. We say we consumed it, and then we save it. It's pretty simple. So let's see what that looks in the aggregate in the beer object. So the static function buy beer, again, accepts brewery name style. It makes an instance of itself. It's setting a beer ID, so it's generating an ID for this beer because it's new. And then it calls the record that function. The record that function will make you're making the event with beer bought with data, and the record that will make sure that prooph handles that and puts it in your database. The other function we saw was the move to. Again, location goes in. It's calling the record that with the event you're making, beer moved. It has all the data it needs, and that gets handled by prooph. The last one here is consume. Again, You only need the event, and you're telling it now, so it will generate a datetime object for you, and it will record that. So let's see what those events look like. So here we see the beer bot event. Here we extend the aggregate change. That's the prooph class that you would use to use the right functions that are in there to make sure that prooph handles it well. The with data we saw that it was called in the aggregates. It makes an instance of itself. The occur is something that prooph handles for you. You just have to put in the right information. Here I'm setting some variables to itself, but that isn't even necessary if for you're not going to use it directly. And after that, it will also make a new datetime object for when it was actually bought, and it returns itself. So if we want the information out of the event, basic getters, I'm checking if the beer ID is stored there, and otherwise I'm just making a beer ID from string with the aggregate ID. The brewer, the name, the style, all look the same, so I collapse those. Basically, again, checking if brewer is there, and otherwise I'm just creating the brewer value object. And for dates, yeah, I'm calling the created at. It's just something that prooph provides. Every event has a date, so why not use it? If we look at the beer move, the other event that we have, basically the same, only the data that's put in there is different. So we have beer ID and location in this case. We're setting some, we're calling the occur with the right information and setting some for later if we want to use it directly. And we're gonna return the event. And if we want to get information out of it, ID, just gonna get the aggregate ID, and location is something you get from the payload. Last one, beer consumed. Again, we're saying beer consumed now, so we're just using the datetime that prooph provides us, calling the occur, giving the right information, returning itself. Getting that information, ID and dates, again, prooph provides an aggregate ID and a created at, so why not use them? So now we have the events in our system. Let's go back to the aggregate and see what happens when I replay those events on my aggregate, on my beer objects. What would happen? Little disclaimer, there's code in there that's frowned upon by many, but I really like it. We're gonna start at the bottom at the apply. We're saying aggregate changed is coming in, so any event that could be happening in our system or, well, on this object. And there, the thing that is frowned upon, the switch true. I'm just saying, well, whatever event you're having, I will know what function you should call. I've seen multiple implementations of this. If you want to make something dynamic with just getting the name of the event and then put when in front of it, I've seen that. You're free to do whatever. I really like this. So basically, event goes in, the right function is called, and in that function you have the functionality of what has to happen when that event is played. So if we look at the bottom one, when beer was bought, the event goes in, the information is set to that object. At that point it's available. Let's say that you have some kind of concatenated fields where you have the brewer and the name in the same field, this is like this would be the place to concatenate that. Same with was moved, location, and the beer was consumed, the date. It's just set to that object. And then it's done. Then it's replayed that one event, and it will go on to the next one. So in the aggregate, of course, you want to get the information from it. So brewer, name style, bought on, consumed on, and even the aggregate ID might be important information to use further up in your system. So basically, we just built this. We have the commands, the buy beer command and the consume beer command. We have the buy beer handler and the consume beer handler. That goes into the aggregate, and in the aggregate the events are created and will be saved in your system. At least one guy agrees with me. But we have something called side effects. Basically, if you want to make a clean system, you want to have your business logic in one place and your infrastructure code in another place. So you want to say that you have a collection of beer, but you don't want to have your code to call your database and like make SQL queries. You don't want those together with your business logic. So one of the things is you can just make an interface, say, I need this to be able to happen, but there's nothing in there that you don't see that's a MySQL database, or maybe you saved it in a text file or posted it to Twitter. It doesn't matter for the system. It's just saying what it needs. So basically, you're building a giant border wall around your domain logic. So that means that you have to structure your application. Again, this is my interpretation on how I would do it. I've seen it in different forms. But I would be doing something like this. I would have a folder with application data. I will have a folder with domain data. This is my important bits. This is where the objects are that I've shown you. And at the bottom, we can see that there's an infra folder for calling my database, my cache, my Twitter, whatever. So maybe you want to know what is actually saved to the database, what the event, what the result of that event is. It doesn't need that much. It's like every event has this data or this kind of data and basically nothing more. So you have an event stream. You can have multiple event streams. It has a number, which is just an auto increment of those events. It will have an generated event ID. The event name would basically be the name of your object. Payload will be the information, like the brewer or the location. You can have metadata that's like entirely free for you to fill in if you want to store the browser version of your user. That's okay, whatever. Created that, it's the date the event was created. The aggregate version is could be very important for your situation where you want to know how many events were triggered on one type of beer. Let's say I put the KBS in there and then move it again and then consume it. So the last event would have version 4 because it's the 4th event on that particular beer. Every beer has its own ID, so that's the aggregate ID, and the aggregate type will basically would basically say beer because that's the class that I use for the aggregate. So I have this build, but how many beers do I have? And how many different styles do I have? How many beers did I drink in the last 30 days? And for this we use projections. Basically, everything that you need a list of, you can make a projection. So projection in prooph, it allows you to loop through all the events, all past and present events, and build your own view. There are three parts of it. One is your read model, where you define the data that you want to use. So let's say that you're only interested in the style of the beer, then you only need style of the beer in that read model. The projection itself is the logic to know when to add something to your database and when not to add it to your database. Projection is basically a database table that you can throw away and rebuild. And the finder helps you get that information. So basically, if you have a projection of all your consumed beers and you want to know what beers were consumed in April, then you can make a finder function that accepts a month and then gives you a list from that projection. So the projection looks a little bit like this. Basically, you have a project function, and in that project function, you call from stream from your projector, basically your event stream. The init is if you want to track something that's not in the projection, but you have to like count stuff, then you can put it there. But the important bit, it's the when. In the when, you say, okay, when beer bought event is called or is read, I want to call the insert on my read model, and I want to insert an ID, a brewer, a name, a style, and the bought on. That information all comes from the event and is then stored in your database. If we go a little bit further to the beer moved, we again call the stack function of your read model, but this time with an update. So you're saying update where the ID is this, and update the location of this this beer in your projection. And the last one, beer consumed. In this case, we say, if it's consumed, I want it out of this projection because it's not interesting for this list. And that's basically what you can do. So every time you need a different report, if you have a different use case for a list, you will make a different projection. So a lot of the times, questions that I've been asked are that people want to know, like, what can I expect? What are the things I have to look out for? One of those things is refactoring. It's really hard with event sourcing. It's doable, but it's really hard. So it's really important when you do event sourcing that you think about, how do I call my events? What is in an event? What is in an aggregate? What is an aggregate? And what is it like? Sometimes you might have one aggregate, but in the real world, it represents two different things. It's really important to think about it because it's going to take more time to fix it later. But one of the things you could do is versioning. Let's say that you want to add information or change the name of a field or whatever. you can make a new version of that same event and support both the old version and the new version. If something else is happening in your system, if there's a use case that a user does something, why not make a new event to represent what is happening? For instance, maybe a bottle broke. You don't want to be calling beer consumed. That's not what really happened. So maybe you want to have some event to say, okay, this bottle is now gone, but I didn't consume it. Naming things is hard, but it all depends on your domain. And the last thing is, well, just make the event right from the start. That would be the best thing. So, what if something is wrong with the event? Basically, events are immutable, so don't change them. First, you want to try to resolve it in another way. Maybe make, like I said, make a new version or make a new event, or maybe you want to correct an event with a new event. You can try something called Upcaster, where you change an older event to a newer event before you replay it to your system. You can create a new stream and just transfer the events from one stream to the other, but correct them in that process. But yeah, if it's good for you, if you don't work at a bank or anything, or insurance, or maybe something nuclear missiles or whatever, you can just change the event in the database. It's like, what's your level of immutability? If you say, well, it was supposed to be that from the start, okay, you can just change it. So what if I have like 100 trillion gazillion events? Would my system be very slow? It's like, okay, if you're gonna build this and you have more than 1 million events for one aggregate, then you have more experience than me, so you don't ask me. But it's not going to be a problem. There are different solutions for that. It really depends on what kind of environment you're working, what you can actually do. One of the things is snapshots. You can say, I want a snapshot every 1,000 events, so I don't have to loop through those 1,000 events anymore. Then you just say, well, I've like a snapshot of what happens, and then I replay the newer events on top of that. You don't need snapshots from the start. It's like everyone I've talked about, everyone that did event sourcing said, we thought we needed snapshots, but it turns out that the system is so fast that we just didn't implement it because it's not needed. I'm sure there are people working at banks that have more events that use snapshots, but I've never met someone that needed it. If you're going to use snapshots, trigger them on events. Just say every 1,000 events I want a snapshot. It's like automate that stuff and you're done with it. Remember, pure event sourcing is not the holy grail. It's not that like everything is going to be better if event sourced. That's not true. Some things you just want to make a CRUD system of. You don't want to save personal data in events. Again, personal data is by itself pretty mutable. And what say, I think everybody heard of GDPR. Yeah. You can have, you can request to be removed. Well, are you going to delete those events? There are solutions to do it in event sourcing, but it will be much easier to not do this in event sourcing. Just store some kind of account ID, of client ID, of whatever, but don't store names or phone numbers or email addresses in there. If you want a list, make a projection. It will make it a lot easier to read all the information. If you're going to start event sourcing, try a hackathon first. Don't start tomorrow with something that has to be in production next week. It's not a good idea. And remember, if you're not working at an insurance or banking institute, your database is not holy. So, what now? I expect everyone tomorrow or maybe next week to start event sourcing. At least try something. So if you want to get familiar, have some information, documentation, prooph is a really good source. If you use Symfony, there's an example completely done in Symfony. I wrote down the sources for you. That's in the presentation, so you can look at it afterwards. If you don't want to use PHP or you want to use something else, you can use Broadway is PHP related, but Acon and Akka are not. Basically, I think Acon and Akka are both Java related, but I'm not sure. And they are a little bit more mature, where you can event source multiple services. And that's basically it. Thank you for listening, and if you have any questions. No, I have my beer examples are on this slide, the last link. You can look at it. I'm working on making it a complete application, but it's not a complete application just yet. It's right now there are only the examples on there. Yeah. Basically, snapshot in theory would be a representation of a given moment in time. Well, if you want to have it of your aggregate, you can also do that, but you have to build it. Like it's like in a lot of applications, or in a lot of frameworks, you get tooling to make snapshots easier, and most of the time those snapshots would be for projections. But if you have, for instance, something with bank accounts where you have a lot of transactions, a lot of events on one aggregate, and you want to have a snapshot of that, you could, in theory, just make code that say, well, I have a snapshot, it's stored somewhere else, so first get the snapshots and then replay the last 30 events or something. But you have to keep in mind that snapshots, you're probably not going to need it from the start. If you're going to need it, it will come on your way when you're working on it. If you have like, well, okay, now it's starting to get a little bit slow, okay, you can go look at snapshots. And most of the time, it's not something that you need a month to build. It's not a complex solution. But it depends. Like if you have 30 aggregates and you need snapshots for everyone, yeah, it's a little bit of work. Yeah. I would not use prooph for that. Maybe you can, Acon or Akka are actually something you can use, or Like I said, Kafka, but this, like, in my opinion, I'm really glad that Prooph changed their whole philosophy, where they say your domain needs to be clean of third-party code, so you need to build it yourself and know what is happening. But on the other side, how it is right now, or how it's still now until the end of next year, they provide you with a lot of things that makes it really easy to start event sourcing. And we used Prooph in production, and if we want to get rid of it, it will take a little bit of time. It won't be like years or anything, but it's just not necessary. So why not? There are other solutions that also provide you with code that you need to use in your domain. Well, okay. But I know that a lot of people, they write the overhead code themselves. So, anything else? Questions? I think there are better resources to have a lot of data about beer, like sites like Rate Beer and Untapped. I don't know about Rate Beer, but Untapped has their own API. I've used it before just to get... I made my own algorithm to check what the best rated beers at a cafe. So I know when to get in and say, oh, give me your best beer, and I know which one it would be. But basically the data I have right now is this. Yeah, it changed a little bit, and it's a little bit more right now. The pictures from 2 or 3 months ago. You even see some bottles with that labels. That's something I brewed myself, but that's basically, this is why I would need a system to track my beer. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah. 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 So scalability doesn't really come in mind when building this, because if I don't use too much overhead and weird stuff, then I can have like the cheapest option on Amazon, and it will just run like it will run like something that's really fast. But yeah, scalability would be a problem if you have like 30,000 events every second. Yeah. Basically, event sourcing gives you the opportunity to distribute that. You can make an instance that's in charge of updating your projection. You can make an instance of a group of aggregates. You can make an instance of process manager, which like keeps track of is everything being done. So there are a lot of options. And yes, event sourcing itself doesn't. Well, it's scalable, but it's not something that, well, if I put this on a cheap machine, it will defeat the whole world. No, if you want scalability, you still have to think about where to split up responsibility, where you want to do your projection. If you have 5 projections and you and your system is telling you that it has a hard time building those projections or keeping track or keeping up with the events, then maybe just make an instance for every, or maybe two, whatever you want, because basically it gives you the option. But it really depends on your situation. Yeah. 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 Again, it depends. I think that the example is like a lot of events on one aggregate. You could say that you change your event stream every year. Just make a snapshot of the last state of like 2017 and then start a new event stream on top of that. And then snapshots, and like you can use every little thing that's available for you. But some of the times you might want to look at separating those, saving those in different databases. Yeah, it really depends on the situation. But most of the time you can easily divide it up in different aggregates. If I have something for beer and I have something for food, for tracking what kind of food I have, I would build that in different aggregates. So I would have different instances, different database, or well, at least tables. But if it grows really big, I can have different databases or whatever. Maybe I want to save the one in Mongo and the other one in MySQL. Yeah, it really depends on your situation, but you have a lot of options. Yeah, yeah. But I would try it first. Something that we discovered when working with Kafka is that it could handle 3 gigs a second inputs, and the consumer could handle 1 gig. So basically that would be terrain where your infrastructure would slow it down and not your processing of events or messages or whatever. So yeah, if you need big stuff, then you're gonna have big problems. But yeah. 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 So basically, that one of the greatest parts is that how awesome does it feel to delete a database table without production going offline, because you can just rebuild that projection, rebuild that table with that information. It's what we do in production right now. If we change something, Just throw away the table and rebuild it, because it's possible that new data is there. Like for us, limited events, so it's done in seconds, well, less than a second, I think. I think our projection right now is 500. I mean, event sourcing is not, we have, with what's running in production right now, we don't have a problem with event sourcing. We have a problem with caching and getting information from different sources. Basically, we're keeping track of products that we want to promote online on Facebook and Google. But it needs translations for that, information about the product. What else? It needs to check if the product is still working, stuff like that. So it's grabbing a lot of information from outside, and that is giving us problems. Event sourcing is like, it's really, really fast. But it is scary, because we do have colleagues which say, oh, we're going to rebuild the whole system because we don't understand event sourcing. It's like, well, do you even know where the problem lies here? Because it's caching. You're going to have that problem if you rebuild it, if you don't at least look at the system. But yeah. So last chance for a question. Well, no questions, then thank you all.